The stagecoach left Laramie at 6:30 in the morning, when the sky was still the color of dirty ash, and the wind had not yet decided what it wanted to do. Claire Donovan sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, which was the posture of a woman pretending she was not terrified. Beside her, 7-year-old Nora had fallen asleep against the window within the first hour, her small face slack and trusting in the way that only children's faces can be. Across from Claire, 7 months past her 5th birthday, Lily was awake and watching the frozen plains scroll past the glass with the focused, unreadable attention of a child who had already learned that the world was not particularly interested in explaining itself. "Mama," Lily said, not looking away from the window, "is it going to snow?" Claire looked out. The clouds to the northwest were the wrong shade of white, dense and yellowish at the bottom, the kind of clouds that came down to meet you. "Maybe a little," she said. That was the second lie she had told that week. The first one was in a letter. The letter had gone to a ranch outside a town called Cutter's Bend, addressed to a Mr. Nathan Hale, in response to a notice she had read in a Laramie newspaper 3 weeks prior. The notice was brief and utilitarian. Housekeeper wanted. Isolated Wyoming ranch. Room and board provided. Apply in writing to N. Hale, Box 7, Cutter's Bend Post. Claire had written back the same afternoon. She had described her experience keeping house, her cooking, her ability to manage livestock and mend clothing and put up preserves. She had described herself as a widow, which was true. She had described herself as reliable and without complication, which was also true, in the way that desperate people convince themselves their situation is manageable. She had not mentioned Nora. She had not mentioned Lily. The letter she received in return was only slightly longer than the original notice. Position available January 14th. Wage is $12 monthly. Stage from Laramie arrives Cutter's Bend Thursdays. N. Hale. No warmth in it, no curiosity about her. Just logistics, which was actually a relief. She could work with logistics. Warmth asked questions. What she could not work with was the alternative, which was a rooming house in Laramie where the landlord had been patient for 6 weeks and was no longer patient. Her husband Martin had been dead for 4 months. He had not died nobly. He had died of a gambling debt called in by men who do not wait. The money he had left, which was not much to begin with, had lasted through October. After that, Claire had taken in mending and sold what furniture she could, and then the week before Christmas she had read a notice about a housekeeper position on an isolated Wyoming ranch, and she had sat down and made a decision that she understood was dishonest and made it anyway. She told herself she would explain everything when she arrived. She told herself that in person it would be different. He would see her, see the girls, understand that they were not a burden but a unit, that they worked and did not complain. She told herself this because she needed to believe it, and because there was no other option, and because the alternative was her children hungry and cold, which was the one calculation that overrode every other. That was December. This was January 14th, and the clouds in the northwest were the wrong shade of white. Joel? The driver's name was Hendricks. Claire knew this because he'd introduced himself with a cheerfulness that seemed almost aggressive at 6 in the morning, a barrel-chested man in a weathered coat who'd helped her with the trunk and patted the horses with an easy familiarity that made her feel, briefly, that everything might be manageable. By noon, Hendricks was not cheerful. He'd been watching those clouds since 10, and twice Claire had heard him speak to the horses in a low, serious voice that was not the voice he'd used that morning. There were 2 other passengers, a traveling goods merchant named Stead, who had fallen asleep before they cleared Laramie's outskirts, and an older woman going to visit her son whose name Claire had not caught. Neither of them seemed to notice the clouds. Claire noticed them because she had grown up in Kansas, and Kansas taught you to watch the sky. "Excuse me," she said, when she could no longer convince herself she was wrong. She leaned toward the window and called up to the driver's seat. "Mr. Hendricks, how far to Cutter's Bend?" A pause. "Hour and a half, maybe 2. And that weather to the northwest." "I see it. Is there somewhere we can stop before—" "There's a way station at mile 40, Hendricks said, and his voice had changed. "We'll make it." They did not make it. The storm arrived as these storms do on the Wyoming high plains, not gradually but all at once, as if the sky had simply decided. One moment there was a sky with clouds in it, The next moment there was nothing but white, horizontal, violent, and the temperature dropped so fast that Claire heard the wood of the coach frame contract with a sound like a pistol shot. Nora woke up and grabbed Claire's arm without saying anything. Lily, who had been awake, went very still. Hendricks was driving hard, pushing the horses, and for a few minutes Claire could not see anything through the windows at all. The older woman across from her had begun to pray under her breath. Instead, the merchant was awake now, gripping the seat strap. All his morning sleepiness burned away. The coach hit the gully at speed. Claire had no clear memory of the impact itself, only the sudden wrongness of the angle, Nora's scream, the terrible sound of the horses, and then the long, rolling fall that seemed to take much longer than it should have, during which she was aware of the girls as weights against her body, her arms locked around them by something more primitive than decision. The coach came to rest on its side. Something hit Claire in the shoulder. Glass broke somewhere above her, then silence, except for the wind. "Nora," Claire said. "Lily." "I'm here," Nora said from somewhere close. Lily was crying, which was good. Silence would have been worse. The merchant had a cut above his eye and was breathing in short, controlled gasps. The older woman appeared unhurt, but sat very still with her eyes closed. Claire climbed toward what had become the upper side of the overturned coach, which was the door, now above her head, and pushed it open. The cold hit her like something physical. She pulled herself out and looked for Hendricks. He was at the front of the coach, still partly in the driver's seat, which had crumpled sideways. She called his name. He did not answer. She made herself go look, climbing over the side of the overturned coach with the wind tearing at her coat, and she looked at Hendricks for 2 seconds before she looked away. She made herself think. The horses were gone. 2 had broken free of the traces, and the third was down, which she could not help. The storm was not stopping. She had 2 children and 2 other passengers, and no shelter, and no way forward on a road she could no longer see. She climbed back down into the coach. "We need to get out," she told them. "And go where?" Stead said. His voice had an edge to it. "There was a ranch. We passed it. I don't know how far back. Maybe a mile. Maybe a little more." She had seen it from the window. A cluster of buildings set back from the road, smoke from a chimney. She had noted it the way you note these things without knowing you will need them. "We can't stay here. The temperature is going to keep dropping." "A mile in this?" The older woman had opened her eyes. "I know," Claire said. "But we stay here and we die certain. We walk and we have a chance." She helped them out. She wrapped Lily in her own coat over Lily's own coat and tied the extra around the child's middle with her belt. Nora was older and sturdier and kept pace, her face set in the fierce, determined way she had that looked so much like her father that Claire had to look away from it sometimes. They walked into the white.
What's that?
She did not know how long they walked, long enough that she stopped being able to feel her feet with any reliability, long enough that she had to carry Lily, who had gone frightened and heavy and silent in the way that cold does to small children. Stead had taken Nora's hand without being asked, which surprised Claire, and for which she was quietly grateful. The older woman, her name, Claire would later learn, was Mrs. Farwell, walked with a focus that belied her age. When the fence line appeared out of the white, Claire almost didn't believe it. She followed it. Fence lines went somewhere. This one went to a gate, and through the gate there was a lane, and at the end of the lane were lights. She was carrying Lily, and Lily's face was pressed against Claire's neck, and Lily's breathing was too slow and too shallow, and Claire had been aware of this for the last 10 minutes in the controlled, bracketed way of a person who cannot afford to fall apart, but is keeping a precise tally of exactly how frightened she is for later. She knocked on the door. She had time, standing there, to remember the letter, to remember what she had not written in it, to understand that the man on the other side of this door had no reason to help her, and that she had given him at least one concrete reason not to. She knocked again, harder. The door opened. The man in the doorway was taller than she'd imagined. Not dramatically so, but solid, with the kind of build that comes from actual work and not from thinking about it. He had dark hair going gray at the temples and a face that had been left outside in Wyoming long enough to show it. He was holding a lantern. He looked at Claire. He looked at the child in her arms. He looked at the small girl behind her and the 2 strangers, and then he looked back at Claire. "There was an accident," Claire said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "The stagecoach. The driver is dead. My daughter—" She stopped. "She needs to be warm. Right now." The man looked at Lily's face. Something moved in his expression. "Come in," he said, and stepped back. Oh. His name was Nathan Hale. She knew this from the letter, but knowing a name from a letter and meeting the man are entirely different things, and Nathan Hale in person was quieter than she'd expected, and more efficient. Within 3 minutes of their coming through the door, he had Lily on a blanket near the stove. The fire built up, and was pulling off Lily's frozen boots with a matter-of-factness that steadied Claire more than any amount of reassurance would have. He did not speak much. He just moved. His ranch hand, a young man named Dex, who appeared from a back room with hay still on his shirt, was sent to the barn for blankets. Mrs. Farwell sat in a chair near the stove and let Nathan's dog come to her and rest its head in her lap. Stead accepted a tin mug of something hot and held it in both hands and did not say anything. Nora stood close to Claire. She was watching Nathan Hale with the calibrating attention of a child who has learned to assess adults quickly. "She was cold too long," Claire said quietly, crouching near Lily. Her breathing— "I've seen it before," Nathan said, not unkindly. "With calves. You bring the temperature up slow, not too fast." He looked at her. "She's breathing." "I know. Breathing is what matters right now." He went to get more blankets. Nora slipped her hand into Claire's. "Mama?" Nora whispered. "Does he know?" Claire looked at the doorway through which Nathan Hale had just walked. "Not yet," she said. For the next 2 hours, the storm made the decision for all of them. It was not a night you put anyone back outside, which Claire understood. Nathan understood because he did not raise the question. He made food, a practical, unadorned stew with what was clearly whatever he'd had on hand, and set it on the table and did not make ceremony about it. Dex ate with them. Mrs. Farwell instead ate and then sat near the fire, instead fell asleep in his chair, and Mrs. Farwell pretended not to notice. Lily ate a little and then fell asleep properly, the color coming back into her face by degrees. Nora ate everything in her bowl and asked, with the directness that was her particular quality, whether there were horses in the barn. "4," Nathan said. "What kind?" He looked at her for a moment. "Quarter horses, mostly. 1 draft." "We had a horse," Nora said. "His name was Edmund. Papa sold him." A brief silence. Nathan looked at Claire. Claire looked at her stew. "I'm going to check on the animals," Nathan said, and pushed back from the table and got his coat from the hook near the door. He was gone for 20 minutes. Claire used the time to clear the table and wash the dishes, which was partly because the dishes needed washing and partly because she needed something to do with her hands. Nora helped, standing on a stool to reach the basin, handing Claire the rinsed bowls in a wordless, competent, small-person way. When Nathan came back, he shook the snow off his coat and hung it and stood for a moment near the door before he crossed the room and sat back down at the table. He looked at Claire directly. "You're the woman who wrote about the housekeeper position," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Claire said. "You wrote that you were—" He stopped, started again. "You didn't mention children." "No, I didn't." He let that sit. He was not the kind of man, she was beginning to understand, who filled silences to make them more comfortable. He sat in them. "The position was for a single woman," he said finally. "No children mentioned in the notice. I've got 1 hired hand and no—" He looked around the room. "No provisions for—" "I know," Claire said. "I knew when I wrote the letter. I knew it was wrong." She was not going to apologize excessively or explain it in circles. She had made a calculation, and she would own it plainly. "I didn't know what else to do. My husband died in September. We were out of money. The position was—" She stopped. "There wasn't another option. I would have told you when I arrived. I was going to." "Were you?" "I don't know if you'd believe that." He looked at her steadily. "Probably not," he said. It was the honest answer, and she respected it. "What would you like me to do?" she asked. "In the morning, when the storm clears." Nathan Hale looked across the room at the sleeping shape of Lily under the blankets near the stove. He looked at Nora, who had climbed back into her chair, and was watching both of them with those careful eyes. He looked back at Claire. "I don't know yet," he said, and then he went to bed. Date. Claire did not sleep much. She lay on the floor beside the girls. Nathan had given them blankets and the rug near the stove, the warmest spot in the house, without being asked. And she listened to the storm batter the walls, and she thought about the letter and what it had cost and what it might cost still. The house was not what she'd imagined. She had imagined something more orderly, perhaps, or more considered. What it was instead was functional in the way of a house where someone has been keeping himself alive rather than living. The curtains were faded to a color that might have been any color once. There was a coat of ash on the mantel above the stove that was not new. The dishes were clean but mismatched. A crack in the plaster near the kitchen window had been patched with what looked like wadded newspaper. There were signs of someone who had once cared about the house. A faded piece of embroidery hanging by the door, a rocking chair near the window with arms worn smooth from use, alongside signs of someone who had stopped. She lay in the dark, and she listened to her daughters breathe, and she thought about the look on Nathan Hale's face when he'd seen Lily's color and moved to help without being asked. She thought about the food without ceremony, set on the table for whoever needed it. She had expected anger. She had planned for anger. She had not quite planned for this, for a man who was clearly not pleased and was choosing, anyway, to handle it quietly. In the morning, the storm had not fully cleared but had slowed to something manageable, and Nathan came downstairs to find Claire at the stove. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. She had the fire built up already, and the coffee on, and was working on biscuits. She'd found flour and salt and lard in a cast-iron pan and had not asked permission, which she acknowledged to herself was perhaps presumptuous, but the alternative was waiting to be told what to do, and she was not made for waiting. "Coffee's ready," she said, without turning around. She heard him pull out a chair. She poured the coffee and set it in front of him and went back to the biscuits. He drank the coffee. She could feel him watching her, but she did not make it into anything. "Dex will take the others into Cutter's Bend when the road is clear enough," he said. "Stead and the older woman." "That's kind of you." "Not kindness. They can't stay here. Neither can—" He stopped. Claire turned around. She looked at him across the kitchen. "Tell me what you need me to do," she said. "Honestly, not what's polite, what you actually need." He looked at her for a moment. "I need someone who can run a house," he said slowly. "Mine's been running itself for 2 years, which means it's been falling apart for 2 years, which I don't have to tell you because you can see it." He set down his cup. "I need someone who can work. I don't need—" He paused carefully. "I'm not against the girls. I want you to understand that. I'm against the deception. I'm against not knowing what I was agreeing to." "That's fair," Claire said. "Is it going to happen again?" She met his eyes. "No." He looked at her for a long moment with the same steady measuring look she'd seen the night before. Then he picked up his coffee. $12 a month, he said. "Like the letter said. There's a room off the kitchen. It's small, but it's separate." A pause. "The girls can have the storage room across from it. I'll clear it out today." Claire Donovan turned back to the biscuit so that Nathan Hale would not see her face. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "I'm not doing this to be thanked. I need the work done, and you're here." He pushed his chair back. "And don't lie to me again." "I won't." She heard him pull on his coat and go out to the barn. She stood at the stove and she breathed, carefully, once. Then she put the biscuits in the pan. The storage room was indeed small. It had been used for rope and feed supplies and 2 old saddle frames and a crate of miscellaneous metal parts that Dex carried out with cheerful inefficiency over the course of an hour. What remained was a space about 10 feet by 8 with a single narrow window that looked north toward the mountains and a wood floor that was sound, if dusty. Nora inspected it with the seriousness of a field commander assessing terrain. "It's small," she said. "It'll be warm," Claire said. "That wall shares with the kitchen stove." "Where will we sleep?" "I'll find pallets, or we can ask—" Claire paused. "We can see what Mr. Hale has." Nora walked to the window and looked out at the white mountains. "He's not like I thought," she said. "What did you think?" "I thought he'd be angry." She turned around. "About the letter?" Claire said nothing. "He is angry," Nora said, "but he's doing it quietly." She considered this. That's different from Papa. Claire looked at her 7-year-old daughter looking out at Wyoming, and she did not know how to answer that, so she didn't. She just put her arm around Nora's shoulders, and they stood there together at the small cold window, looking north. We're going to work hard, Claire said. Both of us. I know, Nora said, and we're going to be honest with him from now on. Nora thought about this. Even if we're scared? Especially then. Nora nodded with the deliberate gravity of someone taking on a serious agreement. Then Lily appeared in the doorway, fully recovered and already bored, wanting to know if there were eggs because she was hungry and had biscuits already this morning been enough. The days organized themselves. Nathan said almost nothing about the new arrangement, which Claire took to mean he was watching it rather than endorsing it. She rose before dawn and had coffee and usually some form of breakfast waiting when he came in from the early chores. She cleaned the kitchen first, then the main room, then worked outward through the house in a way that was deliberate and systematic without being aggressive about it. She did not redecorate. She did not move furniture without cause, but the ash on the mantel was gone by the 3rd day, and the curtains washed and rehung by the 5th, and by the end of the 2nd week, the crack in the plaster near the window had been properly patched with plaster she'd found in the cellar. Nora helped. This was Nora's nature. She did not wait to be given tasks. She identified them and took them on, which was occasionally inconvenient and usually useful. Lily was less useful and more energetic, and within the 1st week had established a focused attachment to the barn cats that Nathan appeared to find mildly alarming. She let them into the house, Dex reported to Nathan one afternoon, not accusingly, but with the air of a man passing along important logistical information. I noticed, Nathan said. Miss Claire put them back out. I noticed that too. Lily cried. Nathan looked toward the kitchen window. Yeah, he said. I know. That evening at dinner, he put a small tin dish near the back door. For the barn cats, he said, not looking at anyone in particular. If they're going to be in and out, they can eat outside. Lily looked at the tin dish. She looked at Nathan. She did not say anything, which was unusual for Lily, and Nathan Hale did not look up from his plate. Claire looked at her stew. 3 weeks in, she found the maps. She was cleaning out a sideboard in the main room. Not intrusively, just dusting, putting things back as she found them, when she found a rolled collection of survey maps in the bottom drawer, alongside some ledger books and a packet of correspondence that she did not open. The maps were old and the kind of detailed land survey work that she recognized from years spent helping her father, who had been a county clerk in Kansas and had taught her to read land records the way other fathers taught their daughters to read music. She put them back without comment, but she remembered them. It was another week before Nathan mentioned the land survey office in Cutter's Bend. He mentioned it at dinner, to Dex, in the distracted way of a man airing a problem he has been sitting with for some time. Something about a company that had filed paperwork with the county, some question about the eastern boundary of the property, a lawyer's letter that had arrived 2 weeks ago and that Nathan had read 4 times and still was not satisfied he understood. Claire ate her dinner and did not say anything. Later, washing dishes, she did. The letter, she said. The one about the eastern boundary. Can I look at it? Nathan, who was at the table going over accounts, looked up. My father was a county clerk, she said. I grew up reading land records, survey maps. I'm not a lawyer, but I know what the filings should look like, and I know what they sometimes look like when someone is trying to do something they shouldn't. She put down the dish. I might be able to tell you something useful, or I might not, but I could look. A silence. Why didn't you mention this before? Nathan said. You didn't ask. Another silence. He looked at her steadily. It's in the sideboard, he said. Bottom drawer, with the maps. I know, Claire said. I found them when I was cleaning. I put them back. She met his eyes. I told you I wouldn't go through your things. I meant it. Something shifted in his expression. Not dramatically, not warmly, just shifted. He gestured to the table. Pull up a chair, he said. She did. He brought out the maps and the letter and the ledger books, and they sat across from each other at the kitchen table with the lamp between them. And for the next 2 hours, Claire Donovan read through documents that she understood, and Nathan Hale handed her what she needed and did not pretend to know more than he did. She found 3 irregularities before 10 o'clock. The 4th one she found after midnight, And when she looked up, Nathan was still there, elbows on the table, watching her work. "This filing," she said, and pushed a page toward him. "This survey date. It predates the original homestead patent by 4 months. That's not possible unless what? Unless someone backdated it." She looked at him. "Which is fraud." Nathan Hale looked at the page for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "How sure are you?" he said. "Sure enough that you need a lawyer," Claire said. "But sure." He sat back. He ran a hand over his face in a gesture that was tired and something else. Relieved, maybe, or just less alone with the problem than he'd been an hour ago. "All right," he said. "You'll need to go to the county seat," she said. "I can write out what I found. Everything with the page and reference numbers, so you have it organized." "Can you do that tonight?" "If you have paper." He got the paper. She wrote. He sat across from her and drank coffee and read back over the documents she indicated, and did not bother with unnecessary words. It was not comfortable, exactly, but it was something. By the time the lamp ran low, they had something close to a record of the fraud, clear enough to take to a lawyer in the morning. Nathan Hale stood up and stretched and looked at what she had written. "Why are you doing this?" he said. Claire looked at him. "Because it's yours," she said simply, "and someone is trying to take it." He looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. "Get some sleep," he said. "Dex and I leave early." He took the lamp. She sat in the dark for a moment before going to bed, listening to the Wyoming wind move around the corners of the house, and she thought that this was perhaps the most honest conversation she had been part of in a very long time. She was still thinking about that when she fell asleep, which was perhaps why, for the first night since Martin died, she did not dream of anything bad. Dex came back from Cutter's Bend 2 days later with a lawyer's name written on a scrap of paper and a look on his face that said the news was not simple. Nathan was in the barn when Dex rode in, and Claire was on the porch shaking out a rug, which meant she saw Dex's face before Nathan did. She finished with the rug and went inside and put coffee on, because whatever Dex had brought back was going to require sitting down with something warm. Nathan came in from the barn 5 minutes later. He and Dex sat at the kitchen table. Claire set the coffee down and started to move toward the back room, because it was not her business. And Nathan said without looking up, "You can stay." She stayed. Dex pulled the scrap of paper out of his breast pocket and smoothed it on the table. "Lawyer's name is Aldrich. He's in Harmon, not Cutter's Bend, but he knows land law and he's not on retainer with any of the big outfits." He looked at Nathan. "The thing is, I asked around while I was in town, about the survey company, about who filed that claim." "And?" Dex picked up his coffee mug and put it down again without drinking. "It's a company called Meridian Land and Development. They've done this before. 3 ranches in the last 2 years. 2 of them settled, 1 went to court, and the rancher lost." He looked uncomfortable delivering this. "They buy the fraudulent filing from whoever made it, dress it up legal, and then they've got a claim on your eastern water access. You can't prove the creek isn't partially theirs without fighting it in court, and fighting it in court costs more than most ranchers have." Nathan sat with this. He had a way of going still when things were bad. Not frozen, just very quiet. The way a man gets when he's already done the arithmetic in his head and knows what it adds up to. "How much to fight it?" he said. "Aldrich quoted $40 to $60 to start. More if it goes long." Nathan looked at the table. Claire had been listening from the stove. She turned around. "Mr. Hale," she said, "the survey map, the original one, not the Meridian filing, the one in the sideboard." She waited until he looked at her. "That map has a notation in the lower left corner, a surveyor's mark and a date. I didn't mention it the other night because I wasn't sure it mattered, but it does. That mark corresponds to a federal land office filing, not a territorial one, which means the record would be in the federal registry, not just the county." Nathan looked at her. "Meaning what?" "Meaning, if Meridian's filing is in the county records only, and your original patent is in the federal registry, theirs doesn't supersede yours. They'd have to prove fraud at the federal level to touch you, and they haven't filed there." She paused. "I'd need to write to the land office in Cheyenne to confirm it, but if I'm reading that map right, they built their whole scheme on the assumption you didn't know about the federal filing. A lot of ranchers wouldn't." The kitchen was quiet. Dex looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Claire. "You're sure?" Nathan said. "Sure enough to write the letter," she said. "Not sure enough to promise you anything. Nathan picked up his coffee. He drank it. He set it down. "Write the letter," he said. She wrote 3 letters that week. One to the Federal Land Office in Cheyenne, one to Aldrich the lawyer in Harmon, and one to a former colleague of her father's who had worked county records in Kansas and now consulted on land disputes across the territory. She wrote them at the kitchen table after supper when the girls were in bed, with Nathan sometimes at the far end of the table going over his own accounts and sometimes not there at all. The writing took time because she wrote carefully. She was not a lawyer and she knew it, and she was aware that what she wrote could either help Nathan or muddy the water, and so she chose every word with the kind of attention she had once given to her father's ledgers as a girl, when she'd understood that a misplaced number or an imprecise notation was not an abstract error, but a real one, with real consequences for real people. She did not tell Nathan all of this. She just wrote the letters. What she did tell him one evening when he came in from the late check on the animals and found her still at the table was, "I need you to understand that I might be wrong about the federal filing. I don't think I am, but I could be." Nathan hung up his coat. He looked at her across the room. "I know that," he said. "I want to be clear about it." "You've been clear." He came to the table and looked at what she'd written. "You've also been up since before dawn, and it's past 10 o'clock. There's more to... It'll be there in the morning." He said it without authority, just as a fact. He looked tired himself. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for long enough that he'd forgotten what it felt like to put it down. "Go to bed, Mrs. Donovan." She looked up at him. "Claire," she said, "if we're going to be working on this together, Mrs. Donovan is cumbersome." He considered this. "All right," he said. "Claire." He said her name like he was trying on a piece of equipment and reserving judgment. "Go to bed." She went to bed. But she finished the letters first, and they were good ones. February arrived with a cold that was different from January's cold, drier and more patient, settling into the bones of the house and staying there. The stove in the kitchen ran almost continuously, and Claire learned its temperament the way you learn the temperament of a difficult animal, where it ran hot, where it didn't draw well, how much wood it wanted in the night to still have coals in the morning. The house was changing, not dramatically. Nathan was not the kind of man you made dramatic changes around without expecting resistance. But the ash on every surface was gone now, and the windows were clean, and the kitchen organized in the way of a kitchen that was being used rather than just accessed. She had found a crack in the wall of the storage room the girls slept in and chinked it with a mixture of ash and clay she'd read about somewhere, and the room was warmer for it. She'd mended the curtains properly. She'd oiled the hinges on the front door, which had been announcing every entry and exit for apparently years. Nathan noticed these things. He did not comment on most of them, but once, coming in from the barn to find the front door silent, he stopped and opened it and closed it twice, as if verifying the silence. "Hinges," Claire said from the kitchen. "I heard." He went to wash his hands at the basin. "The latch on the cellar door is going," she said. "The wood around the bolt is rotting. I'll look at it." I said I'll look at it. Not unkind, just, this is mine to do." She turned back to the stove. "All right." He looked at it that afternoon. He spent about an hour on it. When he came in for supper, the latch was fixed, and he did not mention it, and neither did she, which was its own kind of understanding. Nora had appointed herself Dex's shadow within the first 2 weeks, a development that Dex found entertaining and Nathan found, Claire suspected, quietly useful, because Dex was 22 and inclined toward inefficiency when left unsupervised, and Nora was constitutionally incapable of watching inefficiency without commenting on it. "She told me I was splitting the wood wrong," Dex reported to Nathan with an expression caught between wounded and amused. "Were you?" A pause. "A little bit." Nathan looked at him. "She's 7, Dex said. "She's right, though." Dex went back out to the woodpile. What Claire watched, more carefully, was Nathan with Lily. Lily was not a shadow. Lily was an ambient presence. She simply existed in whatever space she was in with a totality that made her difficult to ignore. She asked questions constantly and without embarrassment, had no particular filter between thought and speech, and had by the 3rd week found her way onto the bench beside Nathan at the kitchen table during meals in a way that appeared to have happened without anyone deciding it. Nathan did not encourage this. He also did not discourage it. When Lily asked him one evening why he didn't have any children, Claire nearly dropped the pan she was holding. The kitchen went very quiet. Nathan looked down at his plate. He picked up his fork. Put it down. I did, he said. Once. Lily, who did not yet know that some things were not followed up on, said, What happened? Lily, Claire said with quiet firmness. It's all right, Nathan said, though his voice had shifted to something lower and more careful. She got sick, he told Lily, when she was small. Younger than you. He picked his fork back up. That was a while ago. Lily absorbed this with the serious face she used for information that required processing. Was she nice? Yeah, Nathan said. She was. I'm sorry, Lily said, and went back to her supper. Nathan ate without speaking for the rest of the meal. Claire did not look at him, and he did not look at her, but she understood now why the house had the particular quality it had, why it felt like a place that had once been intended for more than one person and had been adjusted over years for less. After the girls were in bed that night, she found him on the porch with his coat on, looking north at the mountains. She brought him a cup of coffee and set it on the railing and turned to go back inside. Her name was Anna, he said. Claire stopped. She was 2. His voice was even, not without feeling, just contained. The way a man gets who has spent a long time managing something. Her mother left the year after. I don't blame her for that. We were both... He stopped. It broke something. Leaving helped her. Staying helped me. Neither of us was wrong. Claire stood in the cold. How long ago? 5 years? She didn't say she was sorry. She thought that wasn't what he needed. You kept the house up, she said instead. He looked at her. You could have let it fall apart. You kept it up. She picked up her own coffee. That matters. He looked back at the mountains. After a moment he said, It needed keeping. She went back inside. She thought that was one of the most honest things she had heard a man say in a long time. Mchamt. The letter from Cheyenne came on a Tuesday in the 3rd week of February. Claire was in the garden plot, not doing anything productive. It was too cold for that, but clearing the old dead growth so that when the time came the ground would be ready, when Dex came back from the post in Cutter's Bend with the mail packet. He handed it to her directly because Nathan was out on the east fence, and Dex was not wrong that Claire would know what she was looking at. She stood in the frozen garden and read the letter twice. Then she walked into the house and set it on the kitchen table and stood over it with her hands flat on the table and breathed carefully. She had been right about the federal filing. The land office letter confirmed it. Nathan's original homestead patent was registered with the federal land office in Cheyenne, dated 3 months before any of Meridian's county-level activity. The federal record superseded the county filing. Meridian's claim, as structured, had no federal standing. She was still standing over it when she heard the back door. Nathan came in, still in his barn coat, and stopped when he saw her face. Good or bad? He said. She turned the letter around and pushed it toward him. He read it. He read it again. He set it down flat on the table. Huh, he said. You're protected, Claire said, at least from this filing. They can't proceed at the federal level without establishing fraud, which means their lawyers would have to admit the county filing was manufactured. They won't do that. Nathan looked at the letter. He looked at Claire. You knew, he said. I thought I knew. There's a difference. You were right. This time. She said it because it was honest and because she did not want him to give her more credit than was warranted. I might have been wrong, but you weren't. She didn't answer that. She got down the coffee tin. I'll write to Aldrich tomorrow and let him know. He should have a copy of this for his files in case Meridian tries another approach. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then, what would this have cost me if you hadn't found it? Claire measured coffee into the pot. The eastern water access. Without the creek access, you'd have trouble in a dry summer. She put the pot on the stove. They'd have offered to settle, eventually, for a price that sounded reasonable and wasn't. And by the time you understood what you'd agreed to, you'd have signed it. And the ranch? Would survive for a while. Maybe long enough, maybe not. Nathan sat down at the table. He looked at the letter. All right, he said, which was the particular word he used when he had processed something and made a decision about it. All right, what? You can look at whatever you need to, the accounts, the records, the deed. All of it. He looked at her steadily. Whatever you think I should know about, you tell me. It was not a small offer. Claire understood that. A man like Nathan Hale handing over the documents of his own holding required something close to trust, which was a thing she had not particularly earned yet. I'll tell you when I find something, she said, and I'll tell you when I'm uncertain. He nodded once. That was that. Perfect. March came in difficult and went out worse. The cold did not break the way it was supposed to, and one of Nathan's mares developed a respiratory illness that cost 2 weeks of Dex's time and all of the veterinary powder from the supply in the tack room. The mare pulled through, but it was not certain for a while, and during the uncertain part, Nathan slept in the barn 2 nights running and ate what Claire brought out to him there. She brought it without commentary. Food and coffee, and once, when the 3rd night looked likely, a lantern with extra oil. He took the lantern and looked at her in the barn doorway. You don't have to do this, he said. I know, she said. Eat the food. He ate it. On the morning of the 4th day, the mare's fever broke, and Nathan came in from the barn looking like a man who had been awake for too long and put down something heavy. He sat at the table. Claire put food in front of him. He ate most of it and then put his head down on his arms on the table and was asleep in about 4 minutes. Claire took the plate. She got a blanket from the chest near the door and put it over his shoulders without waking him. She went and got the girls up quietly and took them outside for the morning chores, and when they came back in, Nathan was still asleep, and Nora looked at the blanket on his shoulders and at Claire and asked nothing, which was unusual for Nora. He woke up an hour before noon and seemed briefly surprised to find the blanket. He looked at Claire. She was at the stove. You should sleep properly tonight, she said. Mare might. Dex can check on the mare. You're not useful to that animal or to this ranch running on nothing. She turned around. That's not me telling you what to do. That's me telling you what I see. He looked at her for a moment. Fine, he said. Fine, she agreed. He slept that night and the mare continued to improve, and March did eventually end, which it does even in Wyoming. Nora brought it up, as Nora brought up most things, directly, without preamble, while everyone else was working out how to approach it. She and Nathan were in the barn one afternoon, Nora helping Dex with something while Nathan worked on a piece of harness, and Nora said, Claire heard this later from Dex, who repeated it with the careful accuracy of a man who knew it mattered. Mr. Hale, are we going to stay? Nathan looked up from the harness. I mean permanently, Nora said, or are we just here until something else happens? Nathan set down the harness. He looked at Nora with the same steady attention he gave everything that was worth attending to. What do you think should happen? He said. Nora appeared to take this seriously. I think Mama is good at this, she said. The house and the land stuff. I think she should stay. A beat. And me and Lily go where Mama goes. That follows, Nathan said. So we should probably stay. But Nathan picked the harness back up. That's a reasonable argument, he said. Do you agree with it? A pause. I'm thinking about it. Nora, apparently satisfied with this answer, went back to what she'd been doing. When Claire heard this from Dex, she stood in the kitchen for a moment and felt something complicated move through her. Gratitude and fear, and something else she didn't have a name for. The Meridian situation resolved itself in the end faster than any of them had expected. Aldrich the lawyer wrote back in early April with the confirmation that Meridian's legal team had reviewed the Federal Registry evidence Claire's letter had prompted and had elected not to pursue the matter further, which was the language lawyers used when they meant, we have decided that losing would be worse than walking away. Nathan read the letter at the table. He set it down. He looked out the window at the ranch, the barn, the fence line, the mountains beyond. It's done, he said. For now, Claire said. A company like that doesn't stop. They'll look for another angle, but this particular approach is closed. You think they'll try again? Maybe not this ranch specifically. There are easier ones. She sat down across from him. But you should keep the federal documentation somewhere you can access it, not just in the sideboard. Where do you suggest? I can make copies. One for Aldrich's files, one for you to keep here, one to send to the federal office with a note requesting confirmation of receipt. She paused. 3 copies means they have to attack all 3 simultaneously, which is significantly harder and significantly more expensive. Nathan looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize. Not admiring exactly, but something like it, filtered through his habitual reserve. "When did you learn to think like that?" he said. "My father taught me that paper protects what fences can't," Claire said. He wasn't wrong. Nathan sat back. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "I underestimated you." It was a simple statement, not a compliment dressed up as one, not an apology, just a fact stated plainly. "You didn't know me," Claire said, "and I didn't help by lying to you at the start. No, you didn't." He looked at the letter, then at her. "But I'm saying it anyway. I underestimated you." She looked back at him. "I know," she said. The corner of his mouth moved briefly, in the way it sometimes did. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. He got up to see about the afternoon chores, and Claire began drafting the 3 copies of the federal documentation. And outside the window, the April sun was doing something tentative with the frozen ground, and the ranch was still there, still his, which was the point. It was Lily who noticed first that things had changed, because Lily noticed everything and had no reason to keep it to herself. She told Nora at bedtime that Mr. Hale wasn't sad the same way anymore. Nora said, "What do you mean the same way?" "He was sad like a house with no one in it," Lily said, with the perfect terrible accuracy of a 5-year-old. "Now he's sad like a house where someone just left. That's different." Nora thought about this for a long time. "I think that's better," she said finally. "Me too," said Lily. Claire, who had been in the hallway and had not meant to overhear, stood very still for a moment. Then she went back to the kitchen and put more wood in the stove and sat down at the table with her letters, and she thought about her own name on the outside of an envelope addressed to a stranger, and the lie she had written into the middle of an honest need, and the strange and imperfect way that something real had come out of it anyway. She did not know what came next. She had learned, this winter, to be careful about thinking she knew what came next. What she knew was this. The house was warm. The girls were sleeping. The land was safe. For the moment, that was enough. That would have to be enough. Because Claire Donovan had spent enough of her life waiting for something that felt permanent to understand that permanence was not something you found. It was something you built, slowly, out of ordinary days. She put another log in the stove and picked up her pen and went back to work. The letter arrived on a Wednesday in the 2nd week of May, which was otherwise a good day. Claire had been in the garden, a real garden now, not just cleared ground, but turned earth with the first seeds in it, when Dex came back from Cutter's Bend with the mail. He handed her the packet without looking at her directly, which was how she knew before she opened it that something was wrong. Dex was not a complicated young man, and he did not have a complicated face. When things were ordinary, he was ordinary about them. When they weren't, he looked at the ground. She wiped her hands on her apron and took the packet. Most of it was routine, a seed catalog Nathan had ordered, a supply invoice from the hardware merchant in town, a notice from the county about road maintenance assessments. And at the bottom of the packet, in an envelope of noticeably better quality than the others, a letter addressed to Mrs. Claire Donovan in a handwriting she recognized before she read the name on the return. She recognized it because she had spent 4 years watching that handwriting sign documents and receipts, and once, a letter to a judge in Laramie that had made her life considerably more difficult for 6 months. Victor Donovan. She stood in the garden with the envelope in her hand, and she did not open it immediately. She looked at the mountains. She had learned this winter and spring to give herself a moment before reacting to things, which was a habit she had not had before, and which she credited partly to watching Nathan handle difficult information with that particular stillness of his. It did not come naturally to her. She was her father's daughter, and her father had been a man of quick reactions, good instincts, and the occasional poorly timed decision, but she was working on it. She opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages, written in Victor's precise, controlled hand. It did not open with any pleasantry. Victor had never bothered with pleasantries when he felt he held the advantage, and the letter made clear by its second sentence that he believed he did. He had found her. He did not say how. He said that as the surviving male relative of Martin Donovan, and as a man of standing in Cheyenne, where he had recently established himself in the freight business, he had consulted with a lawyer regarding the welfare of his brother's children. The lawyer, whose name was printed at the bottom of the page with a Cheyenne address, had advised him that under territorial law, the claim of a paternal blood relative to the guardianship of minor children held considerable weight, particularly in circumstances where the mother's living situation could be characterized as irregular, transient, or financially precarious. He wanted, he wrote, only what was best for Nora and Lily. He was prepared to offer them a stable home in Cheyenne, an education, and opportunities their current circumstances could not provide. He would, he wrote, prefer to resolve this matter without the involvement of the courts. He suggested Claire consider this carefully. He would be in Cutter's Bend within the fortnight. Claire read the letter twice. Then she folded it precisely along its original creases and put it in her apron pocket and went back to the garden and finished what she had been doing, because the seeds did not care about Victor Donovan and they needed to go in the ground. She did not tell Nathan that evening. She told herself she needed to think first, which was true, and also that she was not ready to say it out loud, which was more true. She told him the next morning. She waited until the girls were outside with Dex, Nora supervising the feeding of the horses with her characteristic authority, Lily somewhere in the vicinity of the barn cats. And then she put the letter on the kitchen table in front of Nathan. He read it without speaking. He read it the way he read all documents now, carefully and completely, not skimming. When he was done, he set it flat on the table and looked at it for a moment. Victor Donovan, he said, Martin's brother, and Claire was at the stove. She was not cooking anything. She was just standing near it because it was warm. He's 2 years older than Martin was. Martin and he were not close. Victor thought Martin had made poor decisions. A pause. He wasn't wrong about that, but his interest in Nora and Lily is not what he says it is. What is it? She turned around. Martin left a small inheritance from their father's estate. It was supposed to pass to Martin's children, held in trust until they came of age. Victor was the executor. She met Nathan's eyes. As long as I have the girls, I can ask questions about that trust. As long as Victor has the girls, no one asks questions. Nathan sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment and then back at her. How much? I don't know exactly. Enough that it's worth this. She gestured at the letter. Victor doesn't do anything that isn't worth his time. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Lily's voice floated in from somewhere near the barn, something about a cat, indignant and specific. Frontier law, Nathan said, favors blood relatives, especially male ones, especially when the mother's situation is… She stopped, swallowed. When the mother is employed in an irregular domestic arrangement on a remote ranch, living in 2 small rooms with no independent income beyond her wage. She said it plainly because that was what it was. A territorial judge would look at what Victor can offer and what I can offer, and the outcome would not be difficult to predict. Nathan looked at her. You knew this was possible. I knew it was possible. I didn't know he'd find us. She looked at the letter. I should have planned for it. That was careless. You were surviving. People make mistakes when they're surviving, she said. The mistakes still cost. He was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up the letter and read the last paragraph again. He set it down. He looked at his hands on the table, which was something he did when he was working through something that required care. I have a proposition, he said. Claire waited. Marry me. She looked at him. I mean what I'm saying, he said, and his voice was even. Legally, on paper, and in front of a justice of the peace in Cutter's Bend. If you're my wife and the girls are in my household, the claim Victor has as a blood relative becomes considerably weaker. A 2-parent household, established property, documented income. A territorial judge weighs that differently. Claire stood very still. Nathan, I'm not saying it's simple. I know it's not simple. I'm not saying it's anything other than what it is, he said, a legal arrangement that protects the girls. I'm not… He paused, and something moved in his face that was careful and not easily named. I'm not asking you to feel anything about it that you don't feel. She looked at him across the kitchen. She had known this man for 4 months. She knew how he took his coffee and how he spoke to horses and how he went quiet when something hurt him. and how he had put a tin dish by the back door for barn cats without explaining why. She knew that he had kept a house that had lost its reason and had gone on keeping it. She knew that he was not a man who said things he didn't mean and was not now saying something he didn't mean. "Is it only that?" she said. "Legal arrangement." He met her eyes. "No," he said, "but I'm not going to push you on the rest of it. That's yours to work out." She looked at the letter on the table. She looked at the window and the yard beyond it, where she could see, at the edge of sight, Nora's braid swinging as she walked with the horse feed bucket. "All right," she said. Nathan nodded once. "I'll go to the Justice of the Peace tomorrow." "I'll need to tell the girls." "Yes." "And I'll need to write to Aldrich." "Yes." He stood up. He picked up the letter. "Can I keep this?" "It's yours to keep," she said. He folded it and put it in his breast pocket and went to get his coat for the morning work. At the door, he stopped. "Claire." He waited until she looked at him. "I would have done something about this regardless. I want you to understand that. Married or not." He said it without drama, like a man stating the terms of a fence line. "Those girls aren't going to a man like that. Not while I have anything to say about it." He went out. Claire stood in the kitchen for a long moment. Then she took the coffee pot off the stove before it burned and went to find her daughters. She told Nora first, separately, which was the right call. Nora was 7 and functioned in many respects like a small and very serious adult, and she deserved to be told things directly rather than finding out alongside her younger sister and having to manage her own reaction and Lily's simultaneously. She found Nora in the barn, sitting on a hay bale, drawing something in the dirt with a stick. She sat down beside her. "I need to tell you something," Claire said. Nora looked at her. She already knew, the way Nora always already knew when something had happened, that small animal alertness she'd had since she was 3. "Is it about the letter Dex brought?" "Yes." "Is it bad?" "It's complicated," Claire said, "but we're going to handle it." She told her about Victor. She did not soften it more than necessary, because Nora did not do well with things softened more than necessary. She tended to fill in the gaps with something worse than the truth. She explained the custody law plainly. She explained what Nathan had proposed. Nora listened without interrupting, which was also unusual. When Claire finished, Nora was quiet for a moment. She looked at the dirt drawing she'd been making. It was a horse, Claire saw, a fairly good one. "Do you want to marry him?" Nora said. Claire looked at her daughter. "I think it's the right thing to do," she said. "That's not what I asked." Claire was quiet for a moment. "It's more complicated than wanting," she said finally. "When you're older, you'll understand that some things are both true at once." Nora considered this. "He's good," she said. "Mr. Hale, he's not like Papa." She said it without cruelty. It was simply an observation. "Papa wanted things to be a certain way and got angry when they weren't. Mr. Hale just," she thought, "he just deals with what's there." "Yes," Claire said. "He does." "Okay," Nora said. She went back to her horse drawing. Then, "What about Uncle Victor?" "He's not your uncle in any way that matters." "But he's coming." "Yes." Nora drew another line. "Will he try to take us?" "He'll try," Claire said. "We're not going to let him." Nora looked up. "Promise?" Claire met her daughter's eyes. "Yes," she said, "and she meant it the way you mean things when you have run out of room not to." Telling Lily was a different kind of conversation. Lily was 5 and had a 5-year-old's relationship with complex legal situations, which is to say she did not have one. Claire told her that she and Mr. Hale were going to get married, which was the part that mattered to Lily's daily life, and watched Lily process this with the focused intensity she brought to all new information. "So he'll be our papa?" Lily said. "He'll be your stepfather," Claire said carefully. Lily thought about this. "What's the difference?" Claire opened her mouth and closed it. "It's a different kind of family," she said. "But it's still a family." "Okay," Lily said without apparent difficulty. Then, "Can I tell the barn cats?" "You can tell whoever you like." Lily went to tell the barn cats. Claire watched her go and felt something catch in her chest. Not grief exactly, not joy exactly, but something in the territory between them that did not have a clean name. Victor Donovan arrived in Cutter's Bend on a Friday, which was 12 days after his letter. He came by private coach, not the public stage, which was the first thing people in town noticed. The second thing they noticed was the lawyer he brought with him, a man named Pressler from Cheyenne, who wore a suit that cost more than most people in Cutter's Bend made in 2 months, and who looked at the town with the careful neutrality of a man trying not to show what he actually thought of it. Claire learned all of this from the wife of the dry goods merchant, who sent a note out to the ranch with her husband's delivery wagon on Saturday morning. The note said, "Your brother-in-law and a Cheyenne lawyer are at the hotel. Thought you should know. M. Hartley." She brought the note to Nathan. They were married by then, had been since Wednesday, a brief and pragmatic ceremony in the Justice of the Peace's office in Cutter's Bend, with Dex and Mrs. Hartley from the dry goods store as witnesses. The girls had been there. Nora had worn her good dress and held Claire's hand through the whole of it. Lily had asked the Justice of the Peace if he had a dog, and he did not, and she had expressed appropriate sympathy. Nathan had said the words that were required and had not embellished them, which suited Claire. She had said her own words clearly. Afterward, they had eaten dinner at the hotel dining room, which was the only sit-down restaurant in Cutter's Bend, and Dex had ordered pie and Lily had eaten most of it, and it had been, all things considered, as honest a day as Claire could remember. They were not in love the way people meant when they said it easily. They were something more complicated and possibly more durable, two people who had decided deliberately to stand together, which was a choice rather than a feeling, and which required different things than feeling did. Claire was clear-eyed about this. She thought Nathan was too. She handed him Mrs. Hartley's note on Saturday morning. He read it. "He works fast," Nathan said. "He always did." She took the note back. "He'll file the custody petition on Monday. That's how he operates. Arrive on Friday, spend the weekend gathering information about the local situation, file on Monday morning when the courthouse opens." "What information is he gathering?" "About us. About the ranch. About whether the marriage looks like what it is, or whether it looks like what it is." She paused. "Victor is good at finding the difference between form and substance. It's what he does." Nathan looked at her. "What does he know already?" "He knows I was your housekeeper before I was your wife. He knows the timeline. He'll use that." She set down her coffee. "He'll tell the judge it was a marriage of convenience arranged to defeat his legal claim. He'll call it fraudulent." "Is he wrong?" Claire met his eyes. "About why we married quickly, no. About whether it's real, yes." She said it without wavering. "That's what we have to show." Victor came to the ranch on Sunday. He came in the private coach, which stopped at the end of the lane, and he walked the rest of the way on foot, either because the lane was muddy from recent rain or because he wanted to be seen approaching, which was also a thing Victor did. He was a tall man, dressed well, with the kind of face that had been handsome once, and now was merely authoritative. He had Martin's nose and none of Martin's softness. Nathan and Claire were both on the porch when he came up the lane. This was not accidental. They had talked about it. Victor stopped at the porch steps and looked at them, and then at the ranch, and then back at them. "Claire," he said. "Victor," she said. "You're looking well." His eyes moved to Nathan. "Mr. Hale." "Donovan," Nathan said, and did not extend his hand, which was a choice Victor registered without showing it. "I'd like to speak with my nieces," Victor said. He said it pleasantly, which was how Victor said things when he wanted them to sound reasonable. "Just to see them. Family." "They're not available right now," Claire said. Something moved across his face. "Claire, I drove 3 hours from Cutter's Bend. I think you can allow me 10 minutes with my brother's children." "You drove from Cutter's Bend to file a legal claim to take them away from their mother," Nathan said. His voice was level. "That's not a family visit. So, no, they're not available." Victor looked at Nathan with the particular look of a man recalibrating his assessment of an obstacle. "I understand you recently married my sister-in-law," he said. "Quite recently." "That's right." "Somewhat sudden." "Not particularly," Nathan said. "Things take the time they take." Victor smiled, which did not reach anything above his mouth. "I'm sure." He looked at Claire. "I want you to understand that I have no interest in making this difficult. The girls need stability. They have stability," Claire said. "They have a home, a school." Mrs. Alderton started a school in Cutter's Bend in March. They have... She stopped because she could hear herself beginning to justify, which was what Victor wanted. She made herself stop. They're not going anywhere, Victor. You can do what you feel you need to do legally, but they stay here. Victor looked at her for a long moment. How much do you know about your husband's situation? He said. Before you arrived? The shift was deliberate. Claire felt Nathan go still beside her. I know what I need to know, she said. There were debts, Victor said pleasantly, before the girl died. The medical expenses. I understand he had to sell a significant portion of this ranch's southern acreage to cover them, which means the ranch is smaller than it appears, and that there was a legal matter last winter, a land company with a claim on the eastern boundary. He tilted his head. These are not the circumstances of a stable household, Claire. The land matter was resolved, Nathan said. For now. Victor straightened his jacket. A territorial judge will want to know about the history, not just the current moment. He looked at Claire. I'm offering those girls an education, a house in Cheyenne, social standing. I'm offering them a future. What I'm asking you to consider is whether your feelings are more important than what's best for them. The porch was quiet. Get off my property, Nathan said. He said it without raising his voice. Victor looked at him. You came. You said what you came to say. Now you can go. Nathan took a single step forward, not threateningly, just to make the geometry clear. Monday morning you'll file whatever you're filing and we'll deal with it through the court. Until then, this is my land, and you're not welcome on it. Victor looked at Nathan for a moment longer. Then he looked at Claire with an expression she recognized. The expression of a man who has decided you have made a choice and intends to make you regret it. I'll see you in court then, he said. He walked back down the lane to his coach. Claire and Nathan stood on the porch until the coach had turned onto the main road and disappeared. He knows about Anna, Nathan said. Yes, and the debts. He's thorough, Claire said. He would have talked to people in town, asked questions. Nathan was quiet. He's going to use all of it. He's going to try. She turned to look at him. We need to write to Aldrich tonight. I'll get paper. He went inside. Claire stood on the porch for another moment, looking at the empty lane. The May afternoon was warm, the first real warmth of the year, and from somewhere near the barn she could hear Lily singing something tuneless and particular to herself. The sound of it, small and oblivious and alive, was what kept Claire's hands from shaking. She went inside. Nora found out about the court case on Tuesday, which was one day after Victor filed his petition at the Cutter's Bend courthouse. She found out because she overheard Dex telling the story to the horses in the barn, which was Dex's habit when he was working through something. Dex had not known she was in the hayloft, and she had not made herself known. She heard enough. She came to Claire that evening, after Lily was asleep. He filed, Nora said. She was standing in the kitchen doorway in her nightgown. Claire looked up from the papers spread on the table. Yes. When is the hearing? 3 weeks, June the 2nd. Nora came and sat down across from her at the table. She looked at the papers. What do we need? A lawyer, Aldrich, who helped with the land matter. He knows Nathan, and he knows the ranch's legal standing. What else? Claire looked at her daughter. Nora. I want to know what else, Nora said. I'm not a baby. This is about me and Lily, and I want to know what we need. Claire was quiet for a moment. Witnesses, she said. People who can speak to the household, to what the girls' lives look like here, what it would mean to take them away. Mrs. Hartley from the dry goods store knows us. Mrs. Alderton from the school. Nora nodded. She was looking at the papers with that eyes slightly narrowed look of assessment that she'd had since she was small. What's Victor going to say? That the marriage was arranged to stop him, that the household is unstable, that I'm financially dependent on Nathan, and that the situation before we married was... Claire paused. Irregular. Was it? By certain definitions. Nora thought about this. Can I write something, she said, for the judge? Claire looked at her. What do you mean? A statement, like a letter. I could write about what it's like here, what Nathan is like. Judges read things, don't they, in court? Aldrich would have to advise, but could I? Claire folded her hands on the table. She thought about her 7-year-old daughter asking to write a letter to a territorial judge. She thought about what that letter might say, coming from a child who noticed everything and forgot nothing, and said what she saw without editorializing. "Let me ask Aldrich," she said. Nora nodded, apparently satisfied. She got up from the table. "Nora," Claire said. She stopped. "You don't have to do this. Any of it. This is for adults too." "It's about me," Nora said again, simply. "I should get to say something." She went to the bedroom door, then looked back. "Is Nathan asleep?" "He's in the barn. Last check on the animals." "Okay." She looked at the door that led to the porch, and beyond it, the lamp that was still on in the barn. "He does that every night," she said. "Even when he's tired. Even when there's nothing wrong." "Yes. That's what I want to write about," Nora said. "That kind of thing." She went to bed. Claire sat at the table for a long time after that, listening to the Wyoming night. Nathan came in from the barn at 9:30 and found her still there. He hung up his coat and looked at the papers and at her face. "Nora knows," Claire said. "I figured she would." He sat down. He looked at the papers. "Aldrich's letter. He thinks we can beat it." "He thinks we have a case," Claire said. "That's not the same thing." She looked up. "Victor's lawyer is better than Aldrich." "Probably. And Victor has more money." "Also probably. And the timeline of the marriage is going to look exactly like what it was." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then, "It was also something else. At the same time." He said it carefully, the way he said things that cost him something. "I need you to know that, whatever it looks like to a judge." Claire looked at him across the table. The lamp between them made everything amber and close. "I know," she said. He nodded. He looked at the papers. "What do we do in the morning?" "Write to Aldrich. Ask about Nora's statement. Make a list of witnesses." She rubbed her eyes. "And figure out what Victor knows about the land debts, because he'll use them, and we need to be ready." "The debts are settled," Nathan said. "I know, but settled debts look different in a courtroom than they do in a ledger." She looked at him. "He's going to try to make you look like a man who's been in financial trouble, who has losses, who might not be able to provide for children long term." Nathan's jaw tightened briefly. "The ranch is sound." "I know it is. We need Aldrich to show that." She gathered the papers. "We have 3 weeks. We can do a lot in 3 weeks." He looked at her steadily. "Are you afraid?" he said. She looked back at him. "Yes," she said. "Are you?" "Yes," he said. Neither of them said anything about that for a moment. It sat between them on the table honestly, the way honest things did when you stopped pretending. 3 weeks, Nathan said. 3 weeks, she agreed. He got up and poured 2 cups of coffee and brought them to the table and sat back down, and they went through the papers together until the lamp ran low. 2 people who had chosen each other in the practical, deliberate way that sometimes runs deeper than any other kind, making their case in the only way they knew how, carefully, honestly, and without stopping. Aldrich had an office above the feed store in Harmon that smelled of sawdust and old paper, and the particular mustiness of documents that had been consulted many times. He was a small man with a precise manner and a way of listening that involved very little movement of his face, which Claire had initially mistaken for indifference and had since understood was the opposite. He met with them 4 times in the 3 weeks before the hearing. He was honest with them in the way of a man who had learned that false comfort created worse problems than hard truths. "Pressler is good," he said at the second meeting. He said it without apology, sitting across from Claire and Nathan at his desk with the petition documents spread between them. "He's argued custody cases in Cheyenne and Denver. He knows how to read a territorial judge, and he knows which details to make large and which to make small." "And the judge," Nathan said, "Calloway, fair. Not sympathetic to what he considers social irregularity, but fair." Aldrich picked up a page. "He will not like the timing of the marriage. Pressler will make sure he knows the timing." "We expected that," Claire said. "What he will like, if we show it correctly, is evidence of stability and established community standing." He looked at Claire. "Mrs. Hartley's testimony is useful. Mrs. Alderton's is more useful. A school teacher carries weight." "What about the land situation?" Nathan said. "The Meridian matter." Resolved in your favor through legitimate legal channels, which actually works for us if I frame it correctly. You identified fraud and addressed it properly. That's not the portrait of a man in chaotic financial circumstances. That's the portrait of a man who protects what he has. Aldrich made a note. I'll want to walk you through that in detail. And Nora's statement, Claire said. Aldrich set down his pen. He had been cautious about this since Claire first raised it, and he was still cautious, which she respected because his caution was not reflexive but considered. I've read what she wrote, he said. I want to be careful about how I say this. It is the most persuasive thing in our file. He paused. A 7-year-old's written statement is not standard in these proceedings. Pressler will object to its admission. On what grounds? Nathan said. Age, competence.
Undue influence by the mother. He looked at Claire. He'll imply you told her what to write. I didn't. I know you didn't. Nora's voice in those pages is entirely her own. No adult wrote that. But I need to be prepared to establish that to the judge's satisfaction. He tapped the statement where it lay in the file. I may call her as a witness. Claire looked at him. She's 7. I'm aware. She'd have to stand up in front of... I know what it means, Aldrich said. I'm not doing it unless the statement gets blocked, and I have no other way to get her words in front of the judge. But she should know it's possible. He looked at Claire steadily. Can she do it? Claire thought about her daughter standing in the kitchen doorway in her nightgown, asking to write a letter to a judge. She thought about Nora at the porch steps while Victor walked back down the lane, watching him with those careful, unreadable eyes. Yes, she said. She can do it. Then we prepare for both possibilities, Aldrich said, and moved on. The night before the hearing, nobody slept particularly well. Claire was aware of Nathan getting up at some point after midnight. She heard the back door, soft so as not to wake anyone, and then silence, and she lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling. After a while, she got up too. He was on the porch, not looking at anything in particular, just standing in the Wyoming dark with his hands in his coat pockets and the mountains a darker shape against the dark sky. She brought a blanket and stood beside him and didn't offer it, just had it. I keep thinking about what he said, Nathan said, about Anna, the medical debts. He's going to use it to make you look unstable. I know. A pause. It was a hard 2 years. After. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. He looked at the mountains. The debts were real. Selling the South acreage was real. I made the best decisions I could make, and some of them were wrong. That's not instability, Claire said. That's just life. Pressler's not going to call it life. No, she agreed. But Aldrich will. Nathan was quiet for a moment. She could see his breath in the cold May night. If it goes wrong tomorrow, he said. It won't. But if it does, she looked at him. Then we appeal, she said. We keep appealing. We do not stop. She said it without making it dramatic because it wasn't dramatic. It was just the truth. Victor does not get those girls. Whatever it takes and however long it takes. He looked at her. In the dark, his face was hard to read, but she had been learning to read it for 4 months, and she knew what the set of his shoulders meant. I should have said this before, he said. He stopped. I'm not good at saying things directly. You're better than you think. I mean, the things that... He stopped again, put his hands back in his pockets, took a breath. I'm glad you knocked on this door, he said. That night, regardless of how it came about, I'm glad you were here. She looked at him for a moment. So am I, she said. Not a declaration, not anything that needed to be more than what it was. Just 2 honest people standing in the dark, saying true things. She handed him the blanket. He put it around his shoulders. They stood on the porch until it got too cold, and then they went back inside, and in the morning they got up and dressed and made breakfast and drove to Cutter's Bend to fight for their family. The courthouse in Cutter's Bend was the most substantial building in town, 2 stories of territorial sandstone with a wooden floor that announced everyone who walked on it. The courtroom on the 2nd floor held perhaps 40 people in its gallery benches, and by 9 in the morning, most of those seats were full. This surprised Claire. It should not have. Cutter's Bend was a small town, and a custody hearing involving a Cheyenne lawyer and a recently arrived outside claimant
was the most interesting thing to happen since the Meridian land case, which itself had not made the newspapers but had made every conversation for 6 weeks. People came because they knew Nathan. People came because they had watched Claire fix the dry goods order when the accounting was wrong, and because Nora had won the spelling contest at Mrs. Alderton's school the previous month, and because Lily had appointed herself the unofficial greeter of every delivery wagon that came through town. Mrs. Hartley was in the gallery. Mrs. Alderton. Dex, who had cleaned up more than Claire had ever seen him clean up and was sitting very straight. 3 other ranchers Nathan knew, who had come without being asked, which was the frontier's way of saying something it would not say directly. Victor sat at the opposing table with Pressler. Victor was dressed for Cheyenne, not Cutter's Bend. Pressler had the same expensive suit from the hotel visit, and he had laid his papers out with the organized efficiency of a man who had done this many times and expected to do it again and again after. Claire sat beside Aldrich. Nathan sat beside Claire. Under the table, not visible to anyone, her hand found his and he let it. Judge Calloway was older than Claire had expected, 60 at least, with white hair and a face that held the permanent expression of a man who had heard every possible version of human difficulty and was not easily surprised by any of them. He called the court to order at 9 sharp, read the petition into the record, and looked over his glasses at both tables. "Mr. Pressler," he said, "you may proceed." Pressler was as good as Aldrich had said. He opened without drama, which was its own kind of drama. He spoke about Martin Donovan, about his death, about the circumstances it left his daughters in, about the months that followed. He spoke carefully and without overt accusation, which was more effective than accusation would have been because it left the judge to do the work himself. "The question before this court," Pressler said, "is not whether Mrs. Hale, formerly Mrs. Donovan, loves her daughters. No one doubts that she does. The question is whether love, in the absence of stability and legitimate long-term provision, constitutes adequate grounds for custody. And I intend to demonstrate that the home these children currently occupy was, until very recently, neither stable nor legitimate in the conventional sense." He called his first witness, a man from Laramie named Greer, who had been the landlord of the rooming house where Claire and the girls had stayed after Martin's death. Greer described the 6 weeks of arrears, the state of the rooms, the condition of the family's finances as he had observed them. He was not cruel about it. That was Pressler's talent. He had selected witnesses who stated facts without editorial, which meant Aldrich had nothing objectionable to push against. Then Pressler called a county records clerk from Cheyenne who read into the record the date of Nathan and Claire's marriage and the date Victor's petition was filed. The arithmetic was obvious, and Pressler did not belabor it. Then Pressler produced the records of the medical debts Nathan had incurred after his daughter's illness 5 years prior. He did not dwell on Anna's death. That would have alienated the gallery, and he knew it. He simply established the figure, the year, and the subsequent land sale. He established that Nathan had entered the current arrangement with a smaller property than the one he'd homesteaded. "Mr. Hale's circumstances," Pressler said, "have been marked by significant loss and resulting financial difficulty. This is not a criticism of the man. It is simply the record." Then he moved to the marriage itself. "The petition was filed May 15th, Pressler said. The marriage took place May 12th. He looked at the judge. 3 days prior. 3 days after Mr. Donovan's letter arrived at the ranch. He let that sit. I will not speculate about motive. I will simply note the dates and allow the court to consider them." Calloway wrote something down. Pressler sat. Yep. Aldrich did not rush. He opened by establishing Nathan's homestead record. 16 years on the same land, consistent tax payments, no legal judgments against his person or property. He entered the Federal Land Registry confirmation from Cheyenne into evidence and explained, briefly and clearly, that when a company had attempted to defraud Nathan of his water rights, he had identified the fraud and addressed it through proper legal channels. He did not make this heroic. He made it factual. He called Mrs. Hartley, who described Claire's management of the household with the spare precision of a woman who did not exaggerate and knew that not exaggerating was more convincing. She described the garden, the school enrollment, the evening when Lily had come into the dry goods store with a list of supplies written in Nora's handwriting and conducted the entire transaction herself because Claire had been needed at the ranch.
That child is 5 years old, Mrs. Hartley said. She came in with her list and her coins, and she knew exactly what she was there for. That's not an accident. That's a mother who teaches her children to be capable. Pressler objected that this was opinion, not fact. Sustained, Calloway said mildly. But he had heard it. Mrs. Alderton was more formal on the stand. She was a teacher, and she knew what courts wanted from teachers. She described Nora's enrollment, her academic progress, her particular aptitude for reading and written composition. She described the afternoon Nora had stayed late to help 2 younger children with their letters, which had not been asked of her. She told me, Mrs. Alderton said, that her mother had taught her that knowing something and not sharing it was a kind of waste. Pressler did not object to this one. Then Aldrich called Nathan. Nathan took the stand the way he did everything, without preamble, without performance. He sat down and looked at Calloway and waited. Aldrich walked him through the ranch's history, the current state of the finances, the resolution of the Meridian case. Nathan answered everything directly. He did not dress things up. When Aldrich asked about the debts from Anna's illness, Nathan said, "Yes, it was a hard few years. I sold the south acreage to cover the medical expenses. The remaining land is sound. The cattle herd has recovered. I can show the accounts." "Are the debts settled?" "Completely. 2 years ago." Aldrich produced the documentation. Calloway reviewed it. Then Aldrich asked, "Mr. Hale, when did you understand that you wanted to marry Mrs. Donovan?" Pressler was on his feet. Objection. Relevance. "The petitioner has made the motive and timeline of this marriage central to his argument," Aldrich said. "I'm entitled to explore it." Calloway looked at Nathan. "I'll allow it. Answer the question." Nathan was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, thinking. Claire could see the difference. "I don't know exactly when," he said. "It wasn't a single moment." He looked at his hands. "She arrived in January, in a storm. She had 2 children and no money, and she told me a lie in a letter to get the job, and I knew it, and I was angry about it." He paused. "I gave them shelter because I had no alternative that I could live with. I kept them on because she worked harder and smarter than anyone I'd hired in 16 years, and because the girls—" He stopped, started again. "The girls were just there, in the house, every morning, and I—" He stopped again. The courtroom was very quiet. "I put a dish out for the barn cats because the younger one, Lily, she was going to cry herself to sleep about it, and I couldn't—" He stopped a third time, and something moved in his face that was not embarrassment exactly, but was adjacent to it. "I became responsible for them," he said finally. "Not because I decided to, because it just happened the way it happens. You start doing things for people, and one day you understand you'd do anything for them, and that's what it is." He looked at the judge. "I married Claire when I did because Victor Donovan showed up with a lawyer to take her children, and I wasn't going to allow that regardless of what was convenient for me. But I also married her because by that point she was—" He looked at his hands again. "She was already mine to protect. That's the only way I know how to say it." The courtroom was quiet for a moment longer than usual. Calloway was writing. He wrote for what felt like a long time. Pressler cross-examined Nathan about the debts, the land sale, the timing. Nathan answered everything the same way he'd answered Aldrich, directly, without ornamentation. He did not become defensive. He did not qualify unnecessarily. When Pressler pressed him on the 3-day gap between the letter's arrival and the marriage, Nathan looked at him and said, "Victor came to take 2 little girls from their mother. I moved fast because fast was what the situation needed. I'm not ashamed of that." Pressler moved on. Nora's statement was the next item. Pressler objected to its admission on grounds of the author's age and inability to verify she had written it without guidance. Aldrich asked permission to respond. "Your Honor," he said, "I would ask the court to read the document before ruling on its admission. If upon reading it, the court believes it was written by an adult with an adult's vocabulary and an adult's understanding of legal proceedings, then I will withdraw it. If the court believes it was written by a child, I would argue its authenticity speaks for itself." Calloway looked at Pressler. Pressler sat down, which was his way of objecting without looking obstructive. Calloway read Nora's statement. It took him about 4 minutes. The courtroom was silent enough that Claire could hear the clock on the wall and the distant sound of a horse on the street below. When Calloway set the statement down, his expression was exactly the same as before, that careful judicial neutrality. But he took off his glasses and polished them, which was something people did when they needed a moment. "I'll admit the statement," he said. "Mr. Pressler, you may address it in your closing." Pressler stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to cross-examine the child directly." The gallery stirred. Calloway looked at Pressler for a moment. "On what specifically, Counselor?" "On the origin and composition of the statement, on whether she was coached in its content." Calloway looked at Aldrich. Aldrich looked at Claire. Claire gave him one small nod. "We'll permit it," Aldrich said. "We have nothing to hide." Nora came in from the side room where she had been sitting with Dex, who had spent the morning teaching her a card game to keep her occupied. She was in her good dress, the same one she'd worn to the wedding, and she walked to the stand without looking at anyone in the gallery. She sat down. She put her hands in her lap. She looked at Judge Calloway. "Good morning," Calloway said, and there was something different in his voice than it had been all morning. "Good morning," Nora said. "Do you know why you're here today?" "A man named Victor Donovan wants to take me and my sister away from our mother," Nora said. "He says she can't take care of us properly." "And what do you think about that?" "I think he's wrong," Nora said. "And I think he knows he's wrong, and that makes it worse." Pressler stood to cross-examine. He was careful with her, but he was not a stupid man, and he understood the optics of aggressive cross-examination of a 7-year-old in a small-town courtroom where the gallery included half the community. "Nora," he said, "did your mother help you write the statement you submitted?" "No." "Did Mr. Hale?" "No." "Did anyone read it before you finished it?" Nora thought about this. "Mrs. Alderton, she's my teacher. I asked her if my spelling was right." A small sound from the gallery. "But no one told you what to write?" "Nobody needed to," Nora said. "I know what I've seen?" Pressler paused. He looked at his notes. "In your statement," he said carefully, "you describe Mr. Hale as someone who, and I'm reading directly, does not need to tell you he will be there because you can tell by the way he does things. What did you mean by that?" Nora looked at him. "I meant that some men tell you things to make you feel better," she said. "And some men just do things, and the things they do tell you everything." She paused. "Victor Donovan tells you things. Nathan does things." Pressler had no follow-up question. He sat down. Calloway looked at Nora. "You can go back to your seat," he said. Nora got down from the stand. She walked back through the gate and the railing and past the gallery and did not look at Victor. She sat down next to Dex and he handed her a card and she took it and she looked straight ahead. In the gallery, something had changed. Claire could feel it the way you feel a shift in temperature. Not dramatic, not sudden, just different. Pressler's closing was professional and careful. He returned to the dates, the debts, the documented financial history, the irregular beginning of the domestic arrangement. He used the word convenient 3 times. He reminded the judge that sentiment was not a legal standard and that the welfare of children must be measured against objective circumstances. He was competent. He was not wrong about any fact he cited. Aldrich's closing was shorter. He stood up and he said, "The petitioner has described to this court a household that was financially troubled, that began under irregular circumstances, and that formalized itself quickly in response to legal pressure. All of that is true. None of it is the whole truth." He walked the judge through what was also true. The land secured. The federal record identified and defended. The school enrollment. The community standing. The 16 years Nathan had worked this land. He described what Claire had brought to the household and what the household had brought to Claire and her daughters. He did not over-dramatize it. He just laid it out like a set of documents, the record of ordinary days that accumulate into a life. "Victor Donovan is blood," Aldrich said. "He has a legal argument and he has made it. But the law's interest in blood relations is rooted in a presumption that blood means presence, means investment, means a daily record of care. Mr. Donovan has not been present. He has not been invested. He has not, until there was something to gain, shown any interest at all in his brother's children." He paused. "This court has heard from the people who have been present.
It has read the words of a 7-year-old girl who notices things that most adults would not notice and who wrote them down because she wanted to be heard. I would ask the court to hear her. He sat down. Calloway looked at both tables. He looked at the courtroom. I'll have a decision tomorrow morning, he said. Court is adjourned. The walk out of the courthouse was the longest walk Claire could remember. People in the gallery filed out around them. Mrs. Hartley pressed Claire's hand without saying anything. Mrs. Alderton stopped to say something to Nora that Claire didn't hear. Dex hovered near Nathan with the expression of a man who desperately wanted to say something useful and kept correctly determining that he didn't have it. Victor and Pressler left through the side door. Victor did not look at Claire on his way out. They stood on the steps of the courthouse in the June afternoon, and Aldrich said, I think it went well. I want to be honest that I think it went well, and I also want to be honest that I don't know. That's fair, Nathan said. Go home. Get some sleep. Aldrich put on his hat. I'll see you here at 9 tomorrow. They went home. That evening was quiet in the way of evenings when everyone is thinking the same thing and nobody wants to say it. Claire made supper. Nathan ate and helped with the dishes, which he had started doing sometime in March without anyone making a point of it. Nora was subdued. Lily, who did not fully understand what had happened in the courtroom but understood the weather of the house, was also quieter than usual. After supper, Nora came to where Nathan was sitting on the porch, and she stood beside him for a moment. Did I do okay? She said. Nathan looked at her. Yeah, he said. You did more than okay. Nora nodded. She sat down on the step below him and looked out at the yard. I wasn't scared, she said. I thought I would be. How come you weren't? She thought about it. Because I was telling the truth, she said. If you're telling the truth, it's easier. You don't have to remember what you said. Nathan looked at her for a moment. That's right, he said. They sat there until Claire called them in. That night, when the girls were asleep, Claire sat on the edge of the bed in the small room that was now their room, and she looked at her hands and she thought about tomorrow. About what Calloway's face had looked like when he set down Nora's statement. About what it would mean if it went wrong. About what it would mean if it went right. Nathan came in and he sat beside her. He didn't say anything. She leaned her shoulder against his, and he leaned back, and they sat like that in the dark for a while, not talking. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said. I know, he said. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow was coming regardless. They were at the courthouse at 8:45, which was 15 minutes before they needed to be because nobody had been able to eat much breakfast, and the waiting at home had become its own kind of wait. Dex drove them in. He had cleaned up again, second time in a week, which was unprecedented. And he drove without talking, which was its own form of consideration. Nora sat between Claire and Nathan on the bench seat and looked straight ahead at the road. Lily had been left with Mrs. Hartley, who had offered without being asked, and who had pressed Lily's hand and told her they were going to go look at the new fabric shipment, which Lily found adequately interesting. The courthouse steps were already occupied when they arrived. Mrs. Alderton was there. 3 of the ranchers who had come the day before were back. A few people Claire recognized from town who had not been there yesterday. Nobody said much. They just were there, standing in the June morning with their hats in their hands or their coats on their arms, present in the way that small communities are present for things that matter, which does not require explanation and does not ask for thanks. Nathan looked at them. He looked at the steps and the people on them, and then he looked straight ahead, and his jaw moved once, briefly, in the way it did when something hit him that he was not going to talk about. Come on, Claire said, and they went up the steps. Calloway came in at 9 sharp, same as the day before. He sat. He arranged his papers. He looked at both tables. Pressler was immaculate. Victor sat beside him with the controlled stillness of a man who believed in his position and had paid enough for it that he expected it to hold. Aldrich sat with his hands folded on the table. He had told Claire and Nathan that morning, outside the courthouse in a quiet 3-minute conversation, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I want you prepared for either outcome. Claire had said she was. She wasn't sure that was true, but she said it. Calloway put on his glasses and looked at his papers, and then took his glasses off again. I've given this matter considerable thought, he said. He had a voice that had been trained by years in territorial courtrooms to carry without effort. I
I want to address several things before I deliver my ruling, because I think the arguments made in this case deserve a direct response rather than a simple decision. Pressler sat very still. Victor's eyes moved to the judge. Mr. Donovan's petition rests on two pillars, Calloway said. The first is the legal weight of blood relation under territorial custody statutes. The second is the characterization of the respondent's household as unstable, irregular, and insufficient to serve the long-term welfare of the minor children. He set his papers down flat. I want to address the second pillar first, because it is the one on which the most ink was spent yesterday. He looked at Pressler. Counsel presented a timeline that is factually accurate. The marriage between Claire Donovan and Nathan Hale occurred 3 days after the petitioner's letter arrived at the ranch. The debts incurred by Mr. Hale following his daughter's illness are a matter of record. The initial domestic arrangement, a widowed woman with undisclosed children employed as housekeeper, was irregular by conventional standards. He paused. All of that is true. Victor shifted almost imperceptibly in his seat. What is also true, Calloway continued, is that this court heard testimony from members of this community, a school teacher, a merchant, who described a household functioning with consistency, care, and what I can only call evident competence. What is also true is that the financial record of this ranch, over the past 6 months, shows not a household in decline, but one in recovery and active improvement. What is also true is that Mr. Hale, under cross-examination, described the process by which he came to consider himself responsible for these children, not as a legal transaction, but as the accumulation of ordinary acts of care over a period of months. He stopped. He looked at the statement on his desk, Nora's statement, and he did not pick it up, but he looked at it. And what is also true, he said, more quietly, is that this court received a written statement from a 7-year-old child that I have read 3 times and that I will not soon forget. Not because it was eloquent, though it was, but because it demonstrated a quality of observation and a capacity for honesty that this court rarely encounters from witnesses of any age. He looked up. That child wrote that she could tell the difference between a man who tells you things and a man who does things. I found that distinction applicable to this case in ways I suspect she did not entirely intend. Pressler's pen was motionless on the table. As for the first pillar, Calloway said, the legal weight of blood relation. This is where I want to be direct with the petitioner. He turned his gaze to Victor, and it was not a hostile look, but it was an entirely unambiguous one. Territorial law does give weight to the claims of paternal blood relatives in custody matters. It does so because it presumes that blood relation indicates presence, investment, and an established record of care. Mr. Donovan, you are Martin Donovan's brother. You are Nora and Lily Donovan's uncle by blood. That is not in dispute. A pause. What is in dispute is whether you have demonstrated any of the things that blood relation is presumed to indicate. You have not been present in these children's lives. You have not been invested in their welfare. The record shows no contact, no support, no communication of any kind between you and your brother's family in the 4 months since his death, until a lawyer's letter arrived advising you of a potential inheritance interest. Victor's face was very still. The court does not find that blood relation, in the absence of the investments it is meant to represent, outweighs the demonstrated and documented record of a household that has provided these children with stability, community, education, and what the evidence clearly shows is genuine care. Calloway put his glasses back on. The petition for custody is denied. The minor children, Nora and Lily Donovan, are recognized as properly residing under the legal guardianship of their mother, Claire Hale, and her husband, Nathan Hale, of Cutter's Bend, Wyoming Territory. He stamped the document. Court is adjourned. The sound in the courtroom afterward was not dramatic. There was no outburst, no shouting, no moment of cinematic collapse. What there was a kind of exhale. The gallery releasing something it had been holding. Mrs. Alderton put her hand to her mouth. One of the ranchers near the back said something quiet to the man beside him. Claire sat completely still for approximately 3 seconds. Then Nathan's hand, which had been on the table in front of him, moved to cover hers. She looked at it. She looked at him. He was looking straight ahead at nothing in particular, in the way he looked at things when the feeling was bigger than his face knew what to do with.
Aldrich was already on his feet, gathering papers with the brisk efficiency of a man who had work to do. "I'll file the copy of the ruling at the county office today," he said, "and I'll write to the federal—" He stopped. He looked at them. He allowed himself briefly a small and genuine smile. "You did well," he said, "both of you." Victor left without speaking to anyone. Claire watched him go, watched his back through the courtroom door, the good coat, the Cheyenne posture. She did not feel triumph exactly. She felt something more complicated and less clean than triumph. She felt the particular exhaustion of a fight that should never have been necessary, the particular grief of understanding that someone had looked at her daughters and seen an asset to be acquired, and the particular relief, enormous and imperfect, of knowing that it was over. She thought, he will not come back. Not because he was a man who gave up easily, he wasn't, but because the path he had chosen was closed and the cost of opening another one was now greater than what he stood to gain. Victor was a man of calculation. He would calculate and he would move on to something else, and Nora and Lily would grow up without ever having to understand what he had tried to do. That was the best outcome. It was not a satisfying one, but it was the real one, and Claire had learned this year to take real over satisfying every time. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She went to find her daughters. Lily was at Mrs. Hartley's dry goods store, sitting on the counter, eating a piece of hard candy, and describing to Mrs. Hartley's teenage son, in complete detail, the qualities of each of the 4 barn cats by name. She looked up when Claire came through the door and read Claire's face with the immediate accuracy that small children have for their mother's expressions. "Did we win?" she said. "Yes," Claire said. Lily considered this. "Good," she said, and went back to her candy. Mrs. Hartley came from behind the curtain at the back of the store and looked at Claire, and Claire nodded, and Mrs. Hartley said nothing at all, just put her arms around Claire briefly and firmly, and then stepped back and smoothed her apron and said, "I'll put a pound of coffee in with your next order. You've earned it." Claire laughed. It came out a little ragged and more honest than she intended. Nora was outside with Dex, who had been waiting with the wagon. She was sitting on the wagon wheel hub the way she always did when she was waiting somewhere, balanced on it with the focused ease of someone who had never been told it was an unusual place to sit. She saw Claire come out of the dry goods store. "We won," Nora said. It was not a question. "We won." Nora sat with this for a moment. Then she got down off the wheel hub. "Did Victor leave?" "He left the courthouse. He'll be going back to Cheyenne." "Is he going to try again?" "No," Claire said. "He's done." Nora nodded once. She looked at the courthouse down the street, the sandstone building, the territorial flag, the steps where this morning people had stood without being asked. She looked at it for a moment, and then she looked at Claire. "Can we go home now?" she said. "Yes," Claire said. "We can go home." The drive back to the ranch took 40 minutes. Lily fell asleep against Claire's shoulder inside the first 10 minutes, which was Lily's response to large events. She processed them and then required unconsciousness. Nora sat on Nathan's other side, looking out at the Wyoming landscape. The flat-bottomed sky, the June grass coming up pale green on the hills, the fence lines running parallel to the road. At some point, Nora said, without preamble, "Did you ever have a dog?" Nathan glanced down at her. "My father did. Blue Heeler. Name was something in German I could never pronounce." "What happened to it?" "Old age, good long life." He looked at the road. "Why?" "Lily wants a dog," Nora said. "She's been wanting to ask you, but she keeps asking the cats instead, which doesn't help." "I noticed." "Would you say yes?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Probably," he said. "Eventually." Nora appeared to receive this as satisfactory. She looked back out the window. Dex drove without speaking, but Claire could see the set of his shoulders, relaxed in a way they hadn't been for weeks. He'd been more worried than he'd let on, which was characteristic of Dex, who processed things sideways. The ranch came into view around the long curve of the road, the barn first, then the house, then the mountains behind them that were still snow-capped even in June. Claire had looked at this view dozens of times now, coming back from town or from the garden or just from wherever she'd been, and every time it landed a little differently.
At first, it had been a place she was grateful to exist in temporarily, then a place she was working to maintain, then, without her quite noticing when it happened, a place she thought of as hers. Not because Nathan had given it to her, because she had put her hands into it every day for 5 months, and because her daughters had grown into it, and because the particular slant of the afternoon light on the west wall of the house was something she knew the way you know the things that belong to your life. Dex pulled up at the barn. Nathan got down and came around to help Lily, who was still half asleep and accepted being carried without complaint. Nora jumped down and headed for the barn with the automatic purposefulness of a child who had already decided that the afternoon's first task was the horses. Claire stood by the wagon and looked at the house. The curtains she'd washed and rehung in January were faded but clean. The garden she'd planted in April was coming up properly, the first green shoots of it visible from here. The rows she and Nora had put in on a cold March morning with their breath-making small clouds. The latch on the cellar door, which Nathan had fixed in February, worked. The hinges on the front door were silent. It was not a grand house. It had a crack in the plaster that had been patched twice. The north wall of the storage room needed attention before next winter. The kitchen stove ran hot on the left side, and you had to remember that, or you burned things. None of it was finished, because houses aren't finished. They're just tended. Nathan came up beside her, having settled Lily inside. "What are you looking at?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "Everything." He looked at the house, too, for a moment. "I need to check the east fence this afternoon," he said. "Dex thinks there's a section down." "I know. I'll start supper early. Nora'll want to come with me." "She'll find you." Claire paused. "I want to write to Aldrich tomorrow, about the trust, Martin's estate, the money Victor was managing." Nathan nodded. "You think there's something there?" "I think Victor didn't go to the trouble he went to for nothing. There's something there." She looked at the house. "It may take a long time to establish. These things do, but I want to start." "All right." She looked at him. He was squinting slightly against the afternoon light, his coat still on from the courthouse, and he looked like what he was. A man who had worked this land for 16 years and intended to work it for 16 more, and who was tired right now and would not be tired for long because there was a fence section down and the afternoon didn't wait. "Nathan," she said. He looked at her. She had been thinking about what to say for some time, or maybe she hadn't been thinking about it at all, and it had just been accumulating the way things do when you live closely with someone and watch how they handle the ordinary weight of days. She had watched him be wrong about things and correct himself without drama. She had watched him be gentle with Lily in the particular way of someone who finds it easier to show gentleness through action than through words, which Lily received perfectly because Lily was not a words child. She was a presence child. She felt who was there. She had watched him be patient with Nora's relentless assessment of everything, including him, and she had watched Nora's assessment gradually and without announcement arrive at its conclusion. She had watched him keep a house that had lost its reason, and she knew now, fully, what that had cost him. "I'm glad I knocked on your door," she said. "Not just because of what it gave us, because of what it gave you, too. I think you needed us as much as we needed you, and I think that matters." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his face. Not a smile, but what lived in the same neighborhood as one. "Yeah," he said. "I think that's right." I don't say things I don't mean," she said. "You know that about me by now." "I do." "So you know I mean this." She met his eyes. "We're going to be fine. Not because everything is going to go right from here. It won't, and we both know it. But because we're the kind of people who deal with what's there, and there's nothing the two of us together can't deal with." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's probably true," he said. "It's definitely true." He almost smiled. "Don't get overconfident." "I'm not overconfident," she said. "I'm accurate." He shook his head once, the small movement he used when he wasn't going to argue with something, and went to change out of his courthouse clothes and get ready for the fence. That evening was the first evening in weeks that felt like an ordinary one. Nathan and Nora came back from the east fence at dusk, both of them mud-streaked, and Nora with a long scratch on her forearm from the wire that she was wearing with the pride of someone who had done actual work. Claire cleaned it, and Nora submitted to this with patience,
which was notable, and then Nora went to wash up and came to the table and ate like someone who had been outdoors working, which she had. Lily had helped with supper, specifically by stirring things that didn't need stirring and providing commentary on the consistency of the gravy until Claire found her a task that required less editorial input. They ate. Nathan and Dex talked about the fence and what materials would be needed and whether the South Corner Post had been showing weakness for a while or whether it was recent. Lily described to no one in particular her updated theory about the personalities of the 4 barn cats, which she had apparently revised following the day's events. Nora ate and listened and occasionally inserted a correction into Lily's cat theory that Lily received with the dismissiveness of someone who considered herself the primary authority. It was not a peaceful meal. It was loud in the particular way of a table with children at it, and the gravy was slightly too thick, and Dex knocked over his water cup and spent 5 minutes apologizing for it, and Nathan said Dex in the particular tone that meant stop apologizing, and Dex stopped. Lily asked for a dog again, formally this time, looking at Nathan directly. And Nathan said, "We'll see," which was different from no, and Lily understood the difference and filed it for future reference. After supper, Claire washed the dishes and Nathan dried them, which was the arrangement that had developed without either of them deciding it. And Nora swept the floor, and Lily was supposed to be helping but was sitting on the kitchen bench with a barn cat that had come in through the back door and was pretending this was not happening. It was ordinary. It was genuinely, specifically ordinary, and Claire was aware of this as she stood at the basin washing plates in the lamplight, aware of it the way you are sometimes aware of a moment while you are inside it, which doesn't happen often and which she had learned not to take for granted. She had come to this house with a lie and a letter and 2 children and nothing else. She had come here desperate and calculating and ashamed of the calculation and doing it anyway because the alternative was her daughters cold and hungry, and she was not capable of that alternative. She had not expected goodness. She had expected to manage. What she had found instead was this ordinary, imperfect, loud, muddy, complicated life built out of 5 months of ordinary days, out of dishes and fence repairs and medical debts and fraudulent land filings and legal fights and a tin dish by the back door for barn cats, out of 2 people who had chosen each other in the most practical possible terms and discovered that practical terms were not incompatible with real ones. She thought about what it meant, not in any grand sense, but in the specific particular sense of her own life, which was the only life she had to think with. She thought, you do not find the life you need. You build it. Out of whatever is there. Out of the flawed materials at hand. Your own flawed choices. The flawed circumstances you arrive in. The flawed people you find there. You do not wait for perfect conditions because perfect conditions do not come. You work with what is there, and you are honest about it, and you do not stop. She had lied in a letter and knocked on a door in a blizzard with a dying child in her arms. And it had been the most desperate and most necessary thing she had ever done. She would not recommend it as a strategy. She would also not take it back. What you do in the hardest moment, not what you plan to do, not what you wished you had done, but what you actually do. That is what tells you who you are. She had knocked on the door. Nathan had opened it. Neither of them had known what they were opening a door to. That was always true, about doors. You never really know, Aunt. Later that night, after the girls were asleep and Dex had gone to the bunkhouse and the house had settled into its nighttime sounds, the stove ticking as it cooled, the wind moving around the northwest corner where it always did, Claire sat at the kitchen table with a lamp and began her letter to Aldrich about the trust. She wrote carefully. She explained what she knew and what she suspected and what she could document. She explained that she was not looking for a fight, but that she was looking for an accounting, which was different. She explained that Martin's daughters deserved to know what their grandfather had left them, and she intended to find out. She was on the 2nd page when she heard Nathan's chair on the porch and then the back door, and he came in and looked at her at the table with the lamp and the papers. "Come to bed," he said. "Finishing this letter. It'll be there in the morning." "So will I." She kept writing. "Go to sleep." He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment. "You're going to do this with Victor's estate too," he said. "The same thing you did with Meridian." "Yes." "Go through the records and find what he doesn't want found." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment.
He's going to push back. He can push back all he likes, Claire said. It won't change what the records say. She looked up. Martin's daughters have a right to what was left to them. Victor has been counting on the fact that nobody was in a position to ask the right questions. I'm in a position now. Nathan looked at her. In the lamplight, his face was tired and not young and entirely known to her. He's not going to like you, he said. He already doesn't like me, she said. That ship sailed. I mean, he's going to come after this household. He can try. She held his gaze. We beat him once. We did. We'll beat him again if we have to. She put her pen down. Nathan, I know what I'm asking. It could get complicated. You didn't sign up for... I signed up for whatever this is, he said. He said it with the flatness of a man stating a fact about the weather. Stop acting like I need to be warned. She looked at him. Finish your letter, he said. She picked up her pen. He went and poured himself a glass of water and came and sat at the other end of the table and looked at the accounts he'd left there from the night before, and they sat at opposite ends of the table in the lamplight like two people who had been doing this for years, which they had not, but which it felt like, which was something. She finished the letter around 10 o'clock. She folded it and addressed the envelope and put it with the things to go to town in the morning. Done, she said. Good. He closed the accounts. Come to bed. This time, she did. 3 weeks later, Claire received a reply from Aldrich. He had made inquiries, but carefully, through channels that would not alert Victor before they were ready, and what he found was what Claire had expected, and also worse than she had expected, which was the nature of these things. The trust established by Martin's father had held, at the time of Martin's death, slightly over $400. Victor had been drawing administrative fees against it for 2 years. The fees were legal in structure and illegal in amount, which was precisely the kind of thing Victor was good at. The thing that looked right until you measured it against what right actually required. $400. Not a fortune. Enough to give 2 girls a real start. School, opportunity, the particular freedom that a small amount of financial independence provides. Aldrich wrote that he believed a legal claim was viable and that he was prepared to file it in Cheyenne on their behalf. Claire brought the letter to Nathan at the kitchen table. He read it. He looked at the figure. He set the letter down. $400, he said. He's been at it for 2 years, Claire said. He thought he'd have the girls and the rest of it before anyone looked. Can we win? Aldrich thinks so. It'll take time. Victor will contest it, and he has money for lawyers. She sat down. But the paper trail is there. It's always there, with people like Victor. They're so certain nobody will look that they get careless. Nathan looked at the letter. He looked at the window and the June afternoon beyond it, where Nora and Lily were in the garden. Nora working, Lily offering suggestions. He looked at them for a moment. File it, he said. Claire picked up the letter. She thought about what that money would mean. Not what it could buy, but what it represented. Proof that someone had cared enough to leave something. Proof that Martin, for all his failures and all his poor decisions, had at least been someone's son, and his daughters had not been forgotten by the generation before him. They deserved to know that. They deserved to have it. I'll write to Aldrich today, she said. Summer came to the Wyoming ranch the way it always does. Late and sudden and briefly, as if it knows it is only passing through. The garden Nora and Claire had planted in March came up properly and required constant attention. The east fence was rebuilt. A section of the barn roof that had been soft since winter was replaced over the course of a long July weekend with Dex and 2 neighboring ranchers who showed up on a Saturday morning with tools and no explanation required. They were the same ranchers who had sat in the courthouse gallery in June. In August, Nathan brought home a dog. He brought it home in the wagon, matter of fact about it, a medium-sized brownish animal of uncertain parentage who had been living in the back of the hardware store in Cutter's Bend, and who regarded the world with the alert, slightly skeptical expression of an animal that had made a considered study of humans and maintained certain reservations. Lily named it in approximately 45 seconds. The name was Captain. Captain turned out to be competent with livestock and devoted to Lily in the particular way that animals sometimes choose one person, and that's that. Nathan claimed complete indifference to the dog while feeding it from his hand at the table when he thought nobody was looking.
Nora caught him doing this once. She did not say anything about it. But that evening at dinner, she looked at Nathan across the table, and he looked back at her. And something passed between them that was not a conversation and did not need to be. In September, Aldrich filed the claim against the trust in Cheyenne. Victor responded through his lawyer within 2 weeks. The response was aggressive, which they had expected. It was also not as strong as Victor's money should have bought, which told Claire that Aldrich had been right. The paper trail was there, and even Pressler could see it. It would take months. It would be expensive and complicated, and Victor would make it as difficult as he legally could, because that was what Victor did. But the claim was filed, the records were in front of a Cheyenne judge, and the arithmetic was not on Victor's side. Claire let Aldrich handle it. She had other things to do. She had a ranch to keep, a garden to put up for winter. A daughter learning to ride properly on the quarter horse, Nathan had started working with her on Saturday mornings. Patient and specific in a way that cost him time he did not technically have. Another daughter who had decided that Captain needed formal training and was conducting this training with the combination of authority and creative methodology that characterized everything Lily approached. She had letters to write and accounts to keep and a plaster crack on the north wall of the storage room to address before the first frost. She had a husband who was not easy and not warm in the conventional sense, and who was, she had come to understand, exactly what he appeared to be, which was rarer than it should have been and which she did not take for granted. One evening in September, late, with the first real cold of the coming fall in the air and the lamp burning low on the kitchen table, Nathan looked up from the accounts he was going over and said, without particular context, "I've been thinking about the South Acreage." Claire looked up from the letter she was writing. "The parcel I sold," he said, "after Anna. I've been thinking it might be possible to buy it back in a few years if the herd numbers hold." She looked at him. "It was good land," he said. "I shouldn't have had to sell it." "No," she agreed. "You shouldn't have. I want it back." She looked at him steadily. There was something in this that was not about land, or not only about land. It was about the years when he had been contracting rather than building, surviving rather than choosing, and the slow understanding that surviving was not the end point, that there was something on the other side of survival that required intention. "Then we'll get it back," she said. He looked at her. "It'll take time." "Most things do." He went back to the accounts. She went back to the letter. The lamp between them burned its steady low light, and the Wyoming wind moved around the house the way it always did, finding the corners it knew. There was no moment when it was finished, when the story reached a clean conclusion and everything was resolved, and they looked at each other across a room and understood that they had arrived. That is not how it works. What happened instead was the accumulation of ordinary days, each one requiring something, most of them giving something back. The fence that needed mending, and then the fence that was mended. The gravy that was too thick, and then the gravy that was right. The child who asked a question you didn't have an answer for, and then, eventually, an answer. The frightened woman who had knocked on a stranger's door in a blizzard with a lie in her history and a child in her arms. And the man who had opened that door and made a choice he did not fully understand at the time. And the 4 people who had been strangers and were now the thing that strangers sometimes become when circumstances require it and honesty allows it. Not a perfect family, not a simple one, a real one, which is harder to build and harder to break and worth every difficult day it costs. The lamp burned, the wind found its corners. Captain slept on the kitchen floor where he was not supposed to be, and nobody moved him. The night settled over the Wyoming ranch, and inside it, 4 imperfect people who had chosen each other continued the quiet, ordinary, irreplaceable work of being a home.